This week, both the title of Best Speedrun Tourney Player and Best Platformer Player of 2025 are closer than ever. Starting off on the speedrun side, LunarLobster's second test tournament has finished, and the top 8 matches were absolutely insane. After steamrolling LunarLobster, Shroomy made winners semifinals where he faced off against 2 Italian cats who was fresh off a win on QEaliTgeo. Shroomy started off on the back foot after a loss on swap block land, and things seemed even more dire on their next game, as Italian cats was consistently ahead in 50 slope trials, even reaching the credits first. All he had to do was one last jump. However, he failed to build up enough momentum on this slope. He then missed again. He then somehow collected the coin without activating the end trigger. After 12 missed jumps in total, Shroomy snatched the victory from the jaws of defeat, bringing the set to Game 3. This was on Mellt, where the roles were seemingly flipped as Shroomy was always ahead and died to the last jump, a triple spike. However, after the previous game, he refused to let victory slip away from him and sent Italian cats to the losers bracket. On the opposite side of winners top 8 was QEaliTgeo and Panap, where Panap would take Game 1 on Proto Shift. Panap would then send QEaliTgeo to the losers bracket as he beat Broken Moon without a single death. QEaliTgeo would then face off against Mini Masterman in losers semifinals, who got there through wins on QEaliTgeo and Bran, a top slope boosting player. Their first game was on Mountain Climb, and while it was consistently back and forth, with Mini taking a lead on the third to last checkpoint, it all came down to one jump. QEaliTgeo caught up, boosted himself with a sideways red pad, and double jumped onto the left ledge, whereas Mini kept struggling to do so. QEaliTgeo would then hold on to this lead for the rest of the level. Even though Mini Masterman put up a valiant effort on their second game of 72, it wasn't as close, as QEaliTgeo would finish about a dozen rooms ahead. On the other side of losers semifinals was a rematch between 2 Italian cats and Erzor, who after being sent to losers by the same opponent, clawed his way back with 3 set wins, including an upset against the Army Ants. However, it seemed like history would repeat itself, as Italian cats beat XXV with a commanding lead. However, Erzor would not go down without a fight. Compared to his needle gameplay, Italian cats' dash orb and jetpack control wasn't on point, so even though he was in the lead for most of Food for Thought, these mistakes really piled up, allowing Erzor to close the gap and overtake him at the final checkpoint. But then disaster struck at the final click of the level, where he failed to launch himself through a spike corridor with a red orb. So now it was QEaliTgeo versus 2 Italian cats, where the latter decisively won on Flipside Skyline and the dash orb level GLOOP Demon. Italian would then face off against the loser of Panap versus Shroomy. Panap would win first game on dash tech. In Game 2, Shroomy would start out with an early lead in Geometric Escape. After some last jump deaths in 2 back-to-back rooms, it was suddenly neck and neck again. It came down to the final 2 rooms. Shroomy was the first to wall jump his way through 2 crumbling block walls. However, in the next room, Shroomy really struggled with the 2 rows of saws and crumbling blocks in the final room, dying several times, whereas Panap only died once, sending Shroomy to a rematch against 2 Italian cats. After convincing wins on nerfed Radio Tower by Italian and infiltration by Shroomy, Game 3 was on Little Castle. After Shroomy died a few times in the first room, Italian cats pulled ahead. And unlike last time, Italian wouldn't let Shroomy make a comeback, as he didn't struggle with the hardest click of the level, this blue orb ball click between 2 spikes, as much as the final room as 50 slope trials. Grand Finals was 2 Italian cats versus Panap, and since Panap hasn't lost yet, Italian would have to beat Panap twice to win the tournament. In the first set, none of the games were even close, as Italian would run away with a victory on Tumble Jungle, Panap would respond with a win on Hot Swap, and Italian would bring it to a bracket reset after 20 trials. Starting off in the end of it, 2 Italian cats would jump directly into a thorn of an enemy right before a checkpoint, which let Panap take the win. Game 2 was on dashing over it, and while in the lead, Italian missed this wall jump launch and following landing between 2 platforms, and subsequently fell down 5 floors below Panap. Worse yet, he fell again in a wall jump corridor. However, he clutched a landing on this 1 block column, which likely saved him from a loss, as Panap would fall just moments later to a lower screen. The final game of the tournament was on the game mode trials, and after Panap died on the last jump of the first checkpoint, Italian would keep his lead and win the November test tournament. The December test tournaments will ultimately decide who is the best speedrunner between 2 Italian cats, Panap and Shroomy. The race for the best platformer player of the year has never been closer than now. As a quick refresher, Tanuklen is part of the Eternal 5, now 4, a group of players who have never dropped below the top 10 on platformer rank since its inception in September 2024. However, throughout his time on the rank, he never reached the absolute pinnacle of competition, being at the most a runner-up to Ayumi, someone who had the entire platformer list top 10 completed for several months in a row, or GToast, the current best player, who had at one point verified the entire top 3, and, if including Abyss Deathless, top 4. However, Tanuklen over the past months has beaten top level after top level, and along with mainly Artemka, brought Russia back as the best region at GD platformers, while GToast has been on a semi-hiatus. And at the start of December, Tanuklen beat the Abyss Deathless, and finally overtook GToast as the best player. Which is what I would say if the day before, GToast did not return and beat the hardest jetpack level, I Loved You, and prevent that from happening. GToast isn't backing down without a fight, and is aiming to defend her #1 spot for the rest of the year. So now the question is, what levels are left? Both of them have yet to beat Sedulous, a level with really difficult infinite jump speedrun section, or the former top 1 claustrophobia, Deathless. However, if they both have the same top 10 hardest, with at least one of the aforementioned completions, platformer rank will break the tie with their 11th hardest. In this case, since GToast has I'm happy for Deathless, and Tanuklen doesn't, the tie will be broken in GToast's favor. Of course, the final option both of them have is to verify a top 1, so it's only a matter of time to see who comes out on top. The number 3 player, Artemka, who also verified Dimension, is also closing the gap between himself and Tanuklen with a completion of Ruined this week. Speaking of the best players though, former top 1 player Muzza has gotten a new hardest of Void World, and KEaliTgeo, who is arguably the former best player, has also returned with the completion of Arios. Macloris claims first victor on Crystal River, an auto-scroller inspired by dish rags. He struggled most in the pre-drop, specifically the spider click at 39%. The drop is pretty flashy and cool, and this cube jump at 66%, followed by this jetpack click where you have to avoid hitting the black orbs, was particularly hard for Macloris. He died at the ending section twice before clearing the level. Thank you for watching, and subscribe so we can hit 2K before 2026.